It's the final player season preview episode of the offseason. Today, we're joined again by Caitlin Cooper to finish off the series by looking at the Pacers point guards, Tyrese Haliburton, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, the keynotes for all of their upcoming season on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're finishing off the player season preview series by looking at the point guards. Caitlin Cooper joins us once again for the final installment of this series, looking at the upcoming seasons for Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, and, of course, Tyrese Haliburton, who has the most stability, but still a lot of questions in a changed roster. And as he continues to develop, we get into a lot of topics. Our biggest question for every player, what their likely role could be and what it could look like in the context of their surrounding talent, and their best and worst case scenarios for the coming season, including if their best and worst case scenario aligns with what the Pacers' best worst case scenario is for that player. Really fun conversation. We've done the other 4 of these in past weeks. If you want to dig into those, if you want to hear from the Pacers front office and learn more about the Buddy Hield situation, yesterday's show is for you, or last Thursday's. Tomorrow we'll talk a little more about Hield and some other Pacers veterans as well. It's all coming. But today, let's just talk point guards with Caitlin Cooper. I've spent all day constructing a desk, which thankfully I don't have to construct an offense. That's Tyrese Haliburton's job. It's point guards today for the final season preview episode, previewing the upcoming season for Pacers players. Joining me, as always, on the other end, somebody who I'm sure would be better at building a desk than me. It's Caitlin Cooper, the Tyrese Haliburton shirt creator who got him to wear it into the arena, and yet Tyrese is not her player. Caitlin, how you doing? Can you build a desk better than me?
No, I mean, I don't even own a desk. We've discussed this, Tony. I'm not sitting in front of a desk. I'm sitting in front of a tray.
Then why did I buy a desk? I could have bought a tray.
Exactly. No assembly required. I just flip it up and sit the laptop on it. Good to go.
Is it on something mobile at least? Like, can you move the tray? Whoa.
Special effects.
Caitlin did, in fact, just move the tray. It's been a frustrating day for me, but that's okay. The desk is intact enough that I can record this show, and we can talk about the Pacers point guards, who, amazingly, another influx position. How about that? I think I've said that for all 5 shows. Obviously, Tyrese Haliburton is going to start. He's going to play a lot of minutes behind him. It could depend on what happens with Aaron Nesmith in camp. Chad Buchanan today, we're recording this on Tuesday, the day of the front office media availability, talking about how competitive camp could be with guys battling for minutes and how tricky it's going to be for them to decide, how important people management is going to be. The point guard position, another one of those. Aaron Nesmith, Jordan Nwora, a bunch of guys could be significant in the Pacers deciding who the backup point guard is. And yet, Caitlin, I think we should start with somebody who's not going to be the backup in Tyrese Haliburton, if that's okay with you.
Why not? The easy one first.
I think so, yes. But I also think no, because of what I think is the biggest thing I would like to see from Tyrese Haliburton to some extent this year. Now, I have to start with my question because of that. This is a word that is used with him a lot when asking him questions in postgame a lot, or that he sometimes even brings up. And that is selfish. But usually in the inverse, he is one of the best passers in the league. He's generally not selfish at all. No one thinks of him that way. He gets it out. He gets other guys involved. He's very good at feeling when other guys need to be involved, or even just touch the ball and feel like they're being included in the action. That said, you and I have talked about this before. Tyrese Haliburton is very efficient, right? Last year, 62.4% true shooting. That's excellent. And that is despite, in general, him being a guy who creates a lot of his own shots. His 2-pointers last year, 24.7% of them were assisted. His 3-pointers, under 50%, 44.7%, were assisted. He can self-create extremely efficient offense. All that to say, there's a lot of Pacers possessions where the best result is Tyrese Haliburton creating his own look, trying his hardest to create his own look. That can be the best thing for the Pacers. Of course, his passes are great. He gets everybody involved. It keeps everybody feeling great. Part of the reason the team had good mojo last year was because of that. But my question for Tyrese Haliburton is, can he be a little more selfish? Because I think it would be good for the Pacers offense.
I wonder what the tipping point of that would be, though. Because there are games.
There's one for every player.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are games. There's 2 extremes here that I would point to. The first game that they played against the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think, is telling. because Jaden McDaniels, I think, guarded Tyrese Haliburton better individually than anybody last year. And that was twofold because they're playing against Rudy Gobert. If somebody's in drop coverage, what Tyrese normally, his first instinct is to reject the screen. So he rejects it. Well, when you're rejecting a screen and somebody who's 6'10 is defending you at the point of attack, you haven't exactly clipped Jaden McDaniels. So then he was bothering him at the rim, even though Rudy Gobert was on the opposite side. As the game went on, Jaden was also mixing in some unders, which is a very strange thing to do against Tyrese Haliburton, given the pull-up threat that he is. But it made sense for Jaden McDaniels because very few defenders are able to duck under and both surge out to take away a pull-up shot. And Tyrese, like you just mentioned, is not a selfish player. He doesn't think to shoot first in those situations. So you're taking away his driving angle. You're having all of your limbs to impact the passing angles. And when it got to be the fourth quarter of that game, I think Aaron Nesmith took like 3 threes towards the end of that game. Like Tyrese had open lanes and he wasn't even looking for them. Now fast forward to the last game that he played against Boston, as you will likely recall, when they were trying to screen Marcus Smart off of him. They were trying to hunt Brogdon at times and it wasn't going super effectively. And a lot of those shots ended up being his, and they weren't exactly playing the same style of offense that they do against switches. I wonder if he's trying to self-create more against switches, what the wall of that would be. I think he's kind of walking the right line as it is. Like a stat that I would throw out there that's very interesting on how the Pacers approach this is that Julius Randle used more possessions in isolation last year than the Pacers did as an entire team. Like, it's just not something that they aim to do. They want to get to the next action. They want to go switches for Tyrese. So, I mean, I see your point, and I think that there are very specific. I think you almost have to take it by a game basis and see what the coverage is doing. What is the defense doing? Is this an area where Tyrese, he just passed out of an open layup just because there is times where he does that type of thing.
Right.
But I think that my concerns for him, I shouldn't even say the word concern, but my bigger area of growth for him isn't as a scorer. It's on what's happening on the defensive end of the floor.
Oh, we will get there. We will definitely get to the defensive part, and that ties in a lot with some other stuff. But like, to me, I agree with what you're saying, and the game-by-game basis part's important. I think this is one of his best skills, is like he can very quickly feel out an opposing coverage or an opposing defense and go, okay, here's what's needed of me, or here's what's needed of whatever the player they're going to get an advantage from in that particular game happens to be, right? And that's great. That means that Rick doesn't have to call as many plays. That means that they can be malleable given who's on the floor. That has typically been good for them. At the same time, I think a guy who's as efficient as him with creating his own shots should have higher than the 63rd highest usage rate in the NBA, right? Like, I don't know how much higher, because like you said, there is a point of diminishing returns to that, both via your teammates and from Haliburton himself. But like, I don't know if you fully agree with me here, but like 24, 25-ish just makes more sense to me given what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, I expected it to take somewhat of a jump, but I can see in the micro skills, which to me in the immediate, while they're still kind of in rebuild mode, is the more important aspect, because he is finding ways around certain coverages that bothered him. I think in the long run, when you get in a playoff situation too, and this is something maybe we'll get into, seeing how teams try to scheme and take him out and how he reacts to these things might shade my opinion of what his usage needs to be as well, if that makes sense. I think the two things will be connected to a degree. I think that your best player, you'd like to, him up his scoring probably somewhat, but I just think that he's a different type of player as well. Like, I just think I'm not going to put him in the all-world category that Nikola Jokic is, but they are similar. He's like a point guard version of him in that he's very much wired to pass first. You kind of have to prod him to be the more selfish player. And I think that there is an inclusiveness to that creates like a broader booing effect for his team that I wouldn't want to see him lose that either. So I land somewhere in the middle, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just curious where that's going to end up for him. And truly, if his usage does go up, what does that mean for the rest of the starting five? Because you would need Obi Toppin to be getting touches to presumably be at his most effective. Ben Mathurin certainly is going to need touches, right? Let me use the worst basketball cliche. There is one ball, and they do have to figure out how appropriately to share it, and that is Tyrese Haliburton's perhaps best strength in the NBA, is getting it to the right person at the right time. And some of those other changes would have been baked into my secondary questions for him, which is Bruce Brown potentially starting. We talked about this in the Bruce Brown preview. What does that do to Tyrese's role on defense? Because I think defensive growth for him is important this year, especially on the ball. But in general, if he's roaming more, what does that look like for him? And in turn, not starting next to Buddy Hield, who knows what Hield's future is at all. But Chad Buchanan did say on the record today that they're going to go into camp at least with Ben in their first unit. What does that do for Haliburton? Not being with Hield, who they've been such a dynamic partnership together, and how does that slight role change influence what his growth can be in his second full season with the Pacers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have an effect depending upon what Buddy's long-term future is. I mean, we've talked about this on multiple pods now. The numbers are the numbers in terms of what they are when Tyrese is out there without Buddy and when Buddy's out there without Tyrese. I think there is a synergy there. I think that impacts what they do in transition, and I do think that they added people who naturally want to run. But I'm curious to see what the impact is going to be when Buddy isn't running to the 45, when you're trying to do, two-side fast break and get multiple closeouts on the side of the floor with two players, and the domino effects that can create. The fact that Buddy led all players in the NBA in transition three-point attempts and early three-point attempts. I think that pairs very well with what Tyrese does and also what they do in the half court in terms of, Buddy, if he doesn't get a shot, continuing to move and continuing to respace the floor. Again, that's things that we've talked about, but I do think have been, I think that there's going to be an adjustment period. I don't think he's going to suddenly be what they want him to be in the long term, but I do think that Ben needs to start out as the starter, and the things that Chad mentioned today, I think I mainly agree with. But if the spacing's less than, that's going to be something that Tyrese didn't really experience last year in the half court when he's running the pick and roll. So that is going to be an adjustment for him. And then what you said on the defensive end as well, like Bruce is there. Bruce can do things at the point of attack, but then it kind of goes to Ben again. Like, is Ben going to be able to take on the other top assignment because Andrew and Aaron aren't there? So, or is some of that going to have to fall on Tyrese if Ben can't do it? I mean, that's a valid question because it's not going to be Obi Toppin. Like, you're not putting Obi Toppin out on one of these, on Jaden Ivey, on Darius Garland, on whoever it is. So if Ben's not handling it, then do you have to pivot and have Tyrese doing it? Do you have to make a change to the starting lineup at that point in time? So those are things to monitor, I think, as the season goes along.
Hey, everybody, short little break here so I can talk to you about DoorDash. Burnt your last piece of toast? Your avocados have gone bad? Or is the hot sauce bottle empty? Try grocery delivery from DoorDash. You'll get everything you want delivered when you need it right to your door. You've tried using DoorDash, for example. You've trusted them to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that comes right to you with thousands of grocery stores to choose from. You'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered, or they'll make it right. Sit back and enjoy quality groceries just like you picked them up yourself. And if you want even more value, you can save on all your grocery and restaurant favorites with a $0 delivery fee on all eligible orders with a Dash Pass membership with easy substitutions right in the app. Best-in-class customer support. DoorDash delivers groceries exactly how you want it. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. It's a limited time offer and terms apply. That's 50% off to up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget that's code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. It's kind of been funny now that I've cycled through my big things for Tyrese this season, and that a lot of them are ripple effects from other players' changes and how we've already kind of covered them, but how they really affect him will be interesting. And if there's anyone you would think could adjust to these things, or at least understand what it means for him and means for the rest of his team, it's Tyrese Haliburton, who reads the game very well and gets the Pacers running into their identity all the time. But at the same time, it is an adjustment. It is a small change we'll see there. And the micro skill I'm interested in is his left hand. He doesn't like going left. The Kings, after the game, Malik Monk did not sugarcoat it. He was asked, how did you guys slow down Tyrese Haliburton? He said, we made him go left. That is going to be something that I think he has to slightly improve this year. Do we have to talk about the role here? Do we need to pretend like there's anything other than an obvious answer?
We don't, but I would like to tag on to the going left thing that, like, the Kings did that the first matchup that they played with Davion Mitchell, and it showed up because they were weakening him to switch on pick and roll coverages. And I think in part, like, it's not like, I think sometimes people assume that's because of the handle, and it is a little bit, but mainly it's more so that Tyrese is unique and that he's a right-handed shooter that wants to evade closeouts going to his right. So if you weak him to his left, then he has to shoot a step back going to his left, which isn't his natural pattern. And as well, because he's a floater heavy player, if you weak him when you're on that side of the floor, then when he gathers to go into the floater, you're right there to contest it. So it's almost more limiting him in terms of the two types of shots he's most apt to take. So that will be something to monitor, but I do think that on switches, he got a little bit more comfortable. This is what Patrick Beverley did, right? On the game winner, Patrick Beverley was forcing him to his left, and Tyrese did the one dribble, which Pat did kind of slip and fall on the Miles screen. But when he was weakening it, Tyrese got to the step back, made it game winner. Like, that was a big step in that particular development in terms of, him doing something to his left when it was in a crunch time situation and being able to overcome that coverage. But yeah, as far as the role, I mean, I think we can probably assume he'll be the starting point guard next year.
Tough position battle there for some minutes. It's weird. It's weird how there's so many battles and then just skipping over this section. Like, I didn't even type anything in the role section. Okay.
I guess my only question I would have with his role is more so just like specifically to the defensive end, because if I was coming up with questions for him, and I guess I'll pose this to you. It wasn't my player, but hey, I'm changing the rules. Are you more interested in the question of, can Tyrese make individual strides on defense, whether that's at the point of attack, whether that's chasing guys like, what he had to do in that Germany game against Opes when he slipped through pin downs? Or are you more curious about, can the Pacers protect him better? Which do you think is the more compelling question?
He's probably hit what he can do growing more so than being protected, just because of what it means for your team building choices in the future. You don't have to think as much about adding different types or certain types of players just for that protection reason. Instead, you can build out from other fit things that may be more additive. And of course, every player's individual growth is important, but I think that would be better for them long term, even though I get what you're saying. And
I guess I should rephrase and say, how confident are you in that?
Not a lot. What I was going to say is there's also the relationship of the taxing element of defense and what that means to playing offense, right? If you're running around all the time. And so, sure, maybe he does take a stride in that way, but what does that mean for him being energetic and speedy and his mind being speedy on the offensive end? And that's what makes him so good. So there is that tie-in element as well. I can't say I'm not confident. Like, I generally think players who read the game really well get better at defense fairly quickly, but at the same time, he does have a smaller frame and struggled quite a bit with some stronger guys last year. So I think he's almost like 2 years away from significant growth, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think during FIBA, he had a few moments where he had some really good denials preventing somebody from getting the ball, and then kind of held up okay. I think the main things that stood out to me there was that he did box out some bigger bodies at times, which is going to be important when he is defending up a position, because if he's defending off-ball wings and, you're like last year when they were doing some trapping and you're already at a numbers disadvantage, he's got to be able to hold up and get those box outs. That's got to be an area of improvement for him. And I do think that he had a few of those types of moments that stood out. But, I mean, his footwork on that play where he slipped, that was an issue. His overall, I mean, there's a reason why Team USA wasn't like, they weren't like, hey, Tyrese, go guard Dennis Schroeder. Like, that wasn't a responsibility of his. I don't think they felt any more confident in it than the Pacers do. And some of that goes to his own strengths. Like, he is good at reading passing lanes and sticking his arms in passing lanes. So you kind of want to take advantage of some of what he can do as an aerial ace. But I kind of lean towards the fact that it's going to be more important to continue monitoring what they're doing to protect him in those situations. I think they were already doing a lot to try to last year, whether that was pre-switching on the approach, whether that was shrinking behind him, whether it was practically going into like a quasi 2-3 zone when he got like a mismatch against like somebody like Luka Doncic. I think they were already doing quite a bit. I think that one area that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on is, can you avoid even giving up the switch in the first place? And I think that's one area where he himself is going to have to improve, like actually making an impact when he steps out to show, so that somebody like Bruce Brown or Andrew Nembhard or Aaron Nesmith can maintain that matchup instead of just giving up the soft switch and now he's being attacked in space. Because I don't know, based on what I saw over the summer, if I'm expecting him to make like massive strides, at least at the beginning of the season, in terms of his ability to, actually defend on ball. So I think that's where I land with it.
And some of that is just screen navigation, right? I consider that to be one of his poorest defensive skills, at least right now. And if he doesn't get swallowed up so much, they don't have to soft switch as quickly, or at least fall into that as an early choice. So we'll see if he can improve in that way. He got swallowed on a screen on that Obs 3 that absolutely killed Team USA when he slipped out to the corner, and he recovered fairly well, at least from an agility perspective, but he was going so fast that caused him to slip because the screen just ate him alive and he could not get around it for his life. So the best case scenario involves some improvement on defense, and maybe what you even said, I didn't include this, but now I will, finding out the best combinations or best skill sets to protect him on the defensive end of the floor. And in my best case, which maybe isn't in yours, slightly heightened usage. And what that will do to boost him and the Pacers offense, I think, would go a long way.
Yeah, I think that fully covers it. I mean, I'm not against the overall usage. I think it's more just like I'm just so geared to follow things game by game and evaluate it from that standpoint. But
I mean, the worst case, I guess that there is actually something I would throw in here, and that's that being separated from Buddy Hield like hurts him in a way that is significant, right? And they go, okay, we need either Buddy specifically or a shooter with him, because that would influence their decision making. That would make them have to think differently about how they use Ben or what lineups they use Ben. And maybe Ben can be that shooter one day, but he certainly isn't right now. So I think that the changing of his role, if it negatively impacts him in a certain way, that would be a big loss for the Pacers in terms of what they have to consider, both in short and long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst case for me would be that the floor spacing shrinks. That impacts him in the half court, that you're having question marks about how he fits with Ben by the end of the year. And like, these aren't necessarily things that are directly tied to Tyrese, but if you're having those types of questions, and then also something that I would throw out there is if they are continuing to play at this fast pace, does he start getting more full court pressure than what he saw last year? Will the Pacers start seeing more potential token presses, and how does that impact what they want to do in the open court? And then like just overall what he adjusts to exaggerated coverages, which he was already seeing a lot of those last year. But I just think it's more for Tyrese. The worst case would be the context that he's in, more so than necessarily him individually. But we'll know a lot more about them and building around him as their franchise player by the end of next year.
We certainly will, and you just mentioned floor spacing. So I say we pivot to a knockdown shooter, a near 50, 40, 90 player, TJ McConnell. No caveats needed. I forget how close he was. He had like a horrible stretch of free throws at the end of the season, I believe, that ruined what would have been the funniest 50, 40, 90, I think, of all time. Mr. McConnell, who has a ton of questions about his role despite a ton of growth last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where I want to start out, right? Because I do think that TJ McConnell actively can contribute to winning. So you bring up the end of the year when he was missing some free throws. He was also shooting like out of his mind on non-protected, restricted area paint twos. It was like over 50%. So if we can all think back to a particular game when they played the New York Knicks and he had 18 and 12 in 22 minutes played, he was plus 13 for the game. The Pacers were up 115, 113 with 6 minutes and 11 seconds to play. Do you remember what happened, Tony?
I don't.
He didn't play anymore.
The third to last game of the season.
The third to the last game of the season. He did not play anymore is the answer.
They took him out, right? Yeah.
So I think that speaks to how he contributes to winning. He didn't play anymore because he had 18 and 12 and 22 minutes played. And then he didn't play the final 2 games of the year either. So
they
take
couldn't.
For that what you will.
Yeah, something that always stood out to me about McConnell and the way the Pacers liked to deploy him last year is he was the best at not sacrificing their style, in that he was their second best, he was their best non-Tyrese Haliburton player to me at getting rim pressure and then being able to spray out from there. And that got other guys involved. That forced the defense to bend. I can't remember who I was talking to about this on another team. But TJ's really good at this skill where he has the ball in the lane and he looks like he's retreating out to the 3-point line. And then he, on a dime, whips back into the lane and starts a new drive. And all of a sudden, as a defender, you have to readjust what you're thinking, and the defense isn't all the way reset. And that bends defenses a lot. I think that made him valuable to the Pacers last year, in that not only was he improving in these shooting skills, but they didn't have to sacrifice. So obviously Haliburton sets a style that's impossible to copy. No one can do what he does on the team, but they could at least get close because of TJ's rim pressure at times. And I think that made him really valuable. And that would, in theory, still be the case this coming season, even if there are reasons for him not to be in the rotation.
Yeah, I mean, he's gnashing, right? Like he gnashes, he goes under the lane, he reverse pivots out of it, and he'll hit that little shot, or he'll loop back around. And that is tough for defenses to cover, because a lot of times at the NBA, you can't take the baseline away. It puts too much pressure on the big. So with TJ, I think I agree with what you're saying, because he is like a top 10 hit-ahead passer in the NBA as well in terms of total volume. So as far as transition, he also really wants to motor the ball up the floor. So you're not losing a ton there. he fits that identity. You can continue that identity with the bench when TJ is running it. And then what you said there with drives with the shot near the basket, I looked this up on Second Spectrum. More of his drives end with the shot near the basket than Nembhard or Haliburton. 8.5% of his drives end in that regard. And that is with him having a lower blow-by rate than Haliburton or Nembhard. Like, that's the thing with TJ. He's not usually, like, getting a step. He's seeing an under on the pick and roll, and his handle is such that he can continue to make himself a threat. And also just, like, out of pistol action, like, I bet if I could see statistics from the Pacers on, like, hey, what play type gives you the highest points per possession yield, I bet one of them would be running push action with TJ McConnell, because he's just going to turn the corner. Like, if you're running a sideline interaction, I'm going to bet that he's going to turn the corner and they're going to get a 45 cut, and it's probably going to be an easy score. So, like, I do think he contributes in a lot of ways. And another thing that I would say is that, like, also remember, there were a few games this year, like down in Miami, where TJ played and they did offense-defense substitutions with him and Tyrese Haliburton.
Yeah.
So this all goes into my big question, which is where we'll start. Should he play, Tony? Should he play next year?
Can I hedge and give you the thinking? I mean, everybody kind of knows it, but, like, it's almost about their goals, right? With Andrew specifically, like, do they want to develop Andrew as a multi-positional player now, or do they want to maybe win a little more now and play Andrew a little less and have him be a little more behind going into next year? Because there are ways they could play Andrew this year, maybe not as much as last year, but still a lot, and have McConnell be in the rotation. That's a fine choice. But I think it'd be better for them to play Nembhard at the backup one and have him play on the wing sometimes, because his wing defense is valuable and he's a smart player. And so if that is the choice, then no, I don't think he should play. And Aaron Nesmith is also a long-term choice and valuable. And the gap between the two isn't so huge that I think I would not play TJ McConnell. But I think if they're exclusively thinking about just simply winning basketball games this year, who cares about 2024, 25, then he probably would be in the rotation if I was making 10 guys or even 9.
And I'll say, based on what I heard from Chad's availability, I was not under the impression, while there have been players who have been very outspoken that they want to make the playoffs this year. I'm not saying that Chad didn't want to make the playoffs, but it sounded to me like they're committed to a slower development, long-term plan.
Yes.
So while keeping that in mind, I think some of this also directly connects to Buddy once again, like, not to be a broken record, but depending upon what happens with Buddy, I don't think that they're in a hurry to trade him, but if he were to get moved, it becomes easier to continue playing TJ McConnell.
It does.
Like, because you don't have to fit Buddy in that rotation. You can still play Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nembhard, and TJ McConnell. Now it goes back to the question again, should you do that? I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think what I saw from Andrew at Summer League told me that he's ready to run an offense, and that whether I don't know what the Pacers' long-term vision on this is. It's going to be, I think, one of the most compelling storylines is, from my estimation, that starting spot is going to be Ben's to lose at the 2 spot. We'll see what he does with it. Yeah. We'll see what he does with it, and that, I think that makes complete sense. But if it were to happen, let's say, hypothetically speaking, let's say that Ben doesn't take a step forward and Andrew is running backup point and he does, would it be a consideration at the end of the year of does Andrew necessarily fit better with Tyrese? Do they give any consideration to potentially what are their opinions of running in the long term in offense with 2 pick and roll guards at the same time? I don't know how they feel about that, but I think it's worth it to find out, and, like, not to get, the cart way too far in front of the horse, but whether you like that or you don't like it, I think it's going to be better for the franchise overall to let Andrew have those reins to figure out, is that something we like? And if it isn't, you're maintaining his value for other teams because you're showing him in his overall better role. I think he is capable of playing on the wing and playing next in an off-ball role as well. But I think what I saw from Andrew at Summer League and the back end of last season, that needs to be his spot. And I'm not saying it should be unconditional. I don't think minutes should ever be unconditional. But if you're going to start the year with Ben as a starter, I think you need to start the year with Andrew as the backup point guard.
Does it matter to you at all, for a broad strokes question? And these numbers are not predictive. They are just last year's numbers. But
no, the numbers were bad with Andrew at solo point guard.
Well, that's actually not what I was going to say.
Oh, well, they were bad.
I was going to say that Andrew plus Tyrese together was actually a somewhat bad net rating combo for the Pacers. But Tyrese plus TJ, which these are not minutes you ever want to explore a lot of, were actually okay. They were basically even in those instances. Like, just from a flexibility perspective, if you had two pick and roll attackers together, the McConnell group was actually better than the Nembhard group.
My only thing with that would be the TJ Tyrese group is most likely happening in hybrid lineups against benches.
Yes.
Whereas Andrew was a starter for most of the year as a rookie. So
Over 1,000 minutes with those two together.
But yeah, I mean, the minutes with Andrew at solo guard, they got outscored by 14 points per 100 in 673 minutes played. Like it doesn't reflect that. But this is an area where sometimes I feel like what we as humans can recognize versus what the math can recognize. I would really like to dissect into those numbers and see how much noisiness there is that was leading to some of that. Because from what I'm seeing of his process in the pick and roll, he's ready to run offense. Now, were there hiccups? Sure there were. There was a reason when Tyrese was out that they ended up going back to TJ for a bit as the starting point guard and gave Andrew a bit of a break when he was hitting the rookie wall. His three was not falling to the same degree during that stretch of games. I think he played like 22 games from the point in which Tyrese went down against the Knicks. The next 22 games, I think Andrew shot like 27% from three, at the same time as he was trying to take on a bigger role. And I think some of that kind of weighed on him during that particular stretch. And I think when you watch those threes, it looks like they made a slight adjustment to his shot that then he went back to his old shot at the end of the year, and it rebounded back to like 37% at that point. So something to monitor, but just I thought his patience and his overall cadence, his guile and the pick and roll looks like this is what he's ready to do. So I would want to explore that if I'm the Pacers.
I would too, personally. And I think it's only fitting that TJ McConnell enters Indiana with discussions of is he the backup or the third stringer with Aaron Holiday, and potentially exits Indiana with the same questions with a different young point guard. It's the circle of life.
It is an interesting one, though. I will say I'm a lot more bullish on the idea of Andrew Nembhard than I was Aaron at the time.
As am I.
But it was predictable that Nate would lean into the experience and steady hand and probing of TJ.
How long did they make it? 3 quarters of Aaron Holiday?
Okay, so then, as we said, should he play? I think we both kind of lean toward no. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what is TJ's role at that point? Is he's either the backup point guard, and if he's not the backup point guard, then you're having a conversation of how do you feel about being the third string point guard, being kind of a veteran mentor for this team, because something we haven't talked about on any of these pods is there's no more George Hill. There's no more James Johnson. TJ seems like somebody that all of his teammates enjoy and respect, at least from my outside perspective on that. So, or your other option is you look for a trade and give him an opportunity to play for another team. Because I do think that he, like I said, I think he can contribute to winning. I think he does contribute to winning. So where are you at in the role projection?
Well, you're right to point out the vet thing too, because look, it's only by 9 days over Tice, but he's now the oldest player on the team, right? Like not even just from a personality perspective, from an actual experience and age perspective, with 8 years of service and his birthday being in 1992, he is the most experienced Pacer. He entered the league at the same time as Miles, and he's the oldest. So those are just natural progressions for him. And yeah, I'm with you. I think that I agree. My answer would have been no. You were not putting words in my mouth. And I think that he'll probably be, it might require, like if there's an injury, yeah, he could play. And he's just a very serviceable vet who's just outside looking in. And sometimes that's needed and helpful. But on the flip side, this is a question I asked today. I don't know if the presser's up. I'm assuming it is if you've been talking about it. People management could be a part of this. TJ McConnell's contract is not fully guaranteed next year, right? Like that's going to be the case for a lot of these guys in position battles. How does that make him feel? Can he still be a veteran who knows that he's got to play and play well to get paid maybe 1 or 2 more times in his career? That certainly matters, right? So there's going to be a lot more to it than just, hey, you're the third point guard, go be a vet. There's always more to it than that.
Yeah, and like I said before, I don't think minutes should necessarily be unconditional. But I do think there has to be conditions for getting the minutes, and I do think that you have to prioritize the long-term goals, which is basically what Chad alluded to. Because, like I said, I don't like bringing these things up, but they have signed one player to a second contract who they have drafted other than Miles Turner since they drafted Miles Turner, and that is Edmund Sumner, who ruptured his Achilles and ended up getting traded to Brooklyn on that second contract. No one else has been. So, like, they need to get a win with Ben and Andrew. They really do. Because they just traded Chris Duarte for pocket lint. I don't know what the situation with Isaiah Jackson is going to be. Maybe he rebounds and has a good year for them at backup 5, depending upon how that situation shakes out. But they need to be able to exit next year and say that one or both of them is a critical part of the core. So that needs to be prioritized.
Terry Taylor got 2 contracts, but he was not drafted.
Exactly. He was not somebody that they drafted. But so best and worst case is kind of hard to actually parse here for TJ. I think that the best case is he's the 3rd string point guard. And if Andrew or Tyrese is hurt, he steps up and plays as he's known to do. He battles for the minutes. He pressures Andrew in a way that keeps Andrew, competing. I think that's who Andrew already is, though. I mean, I will say that at Summer League, he's the type of guy that you can be up 20 in a Summer League game and he's still trying to get a stop in isolation. So that's something. I think that on the flip side of that, the worst case, I guess the worst case is you can't find a deal for him and he gets upset because he's not getting to play. Like, that's really the only thing that I can really come up with there.
Yeah, his individual and his brain best case and the Pacers' best case are pretty different
things.
Yeah. That is not as much the case for some of these other guys, but him and Tice are similar in that they're vets who might not play, so they have different versions of what this answer would be. Yeah, because his best case would involve playing, maybe playing a lot and playing well enough that either his deal gets guaranteed fully next year, or when he is waived, or if he is waived, there are teams who are like, "Yep, let's go, let's do this. We need a backup point guard." Like, he still has value to teams as a vet, but the Pacers' best case might not be that, and his worst case would be kind of what you said. And the Pacers' worst case might be this: is that he doesn't play, he has no value, and then it's just not good for anybody next year. And it would be, that's bad for the player, that's bad for the team. That's just not a good ending. Now, it seems like from reporting this summer, there's been interest from at least one team. So presumably he has some positive value right this second. And I can't imagine that him not playing at all would decrease it to like totally none. But at the same time, you just never know with guys at that age what their interest level could be come February.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming you probably read the Mark Stein report that kind of sounded like people indicated to him that the return value for Buddy could be like 2nd-round picks.
I did see that, yes.
That was surprising for me.
That was interesting to me. I mean, we're not talking about Buddy here, but, like Christian Wood, Josh Hart, De'Anthony Melton is the late first tier group recently, and the multiple seconds guys is Jay Crowder, Daylon Wright,
Obi Toppin, Chris Duarte.
I went to the like 3 or 4 second groups, but yes, those guys are. Josh Richardson was the other one. He went for 4 seconds right to New Orleans last year. I think he's better than everybody in the second group, but maybe not quite as good as the guys in the first group. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what that is. And of course, the hard part is it could depend on the salary that comes back, but that is not related to TJ McConnell.
No, it's not. I apologize for interjecting.
That's okay. I like to hash these things out verbally because it's not like I just walk up to people on the street and I'm like, I had to tell you something. So I can dig through it. I need that. I need a neighbor who's really into this stuff that I could just go yell at.
Can you imagine?
No, I actually can't.
You just go outside and, hey, what do you think Buddy Hield's return value might be in a trade?
So some people in the media space that I talk to think this is strange, but like no one in my life is like that into the NBA, which I like, because then when I
do too.
Not in doing NBA stuff, it's like detached. I'm doing something else, like I'm having another hobby or conversation. But at the same time, then I don't get to hear like the fan's perspective or like how a common non-fan feels about XYZ things, which kind of is important information. So it's a strange bridge to have to cross. So I need a neighbor that I could just go think out loud to for 5 minutes a day, and they just go back inside.
Do you want to know a funny anecdote about this?
I would love that.
Should we go off script from the pod?
Yes.
I don't have anybody in my life. I don't have anybody in my life really that's ever talked to me about the NBA. Like, I didn't know even Pacer fans growing up in my corner of the state. Like, everybody just watched IU and Purdue. So this summer I was at a graduation party and somebody was like, "Oh, I've started watching the Pacers," and they were telling my dad this, not me. They're like, "I've started watching the Pacers," and they were sitting there and they're like, "Have you ever watched Tyrese Haliburton play?" This is like an extended relative of mine. And I was like, I have, in fact.
Oh, that is funny. He is the guy that could, in theory, make it creep back into my life. He is the player, I will say, that that they've acquired in the last 5 years that the most people who like adjacently know who the Pacers are like, what do you think of this guy? Is he actually as good as people are saying? So I guess he does have that allure, but
he's bringing it back into our casual conversations.
Most of my friend casual conversations are baseball related, but this is not a baseball podcast, so I can't get into those things.
Well, back to point guards who play for the Pacers. What do you think about Andrew Nembhard?
Well, what do I think about Andrew Nembhard? let's pivot to my question. What do the Pacers think about Andrew Nembhard? Right? That is going to be very telling. And I think we'll find out very quickly in the season, given the role. Look, by being last out of every player, not just among the point guards, out of every player, we've kind of talked about every single factor involved in Andrew Nembhard's role projection. But he started off ball last year quite often, right? I should have had the number in front of me. This is bad. I can't remember how many times he started at exactly point guard, but he started 50-something times off the ball, right? And that was largely because of his defense, but he did grow as an on-ball player as the season progressed. And then he played point guard a lot, and we just talked about, mostly you, because you're better at this than me, talked about a lot of the reasons that he should be explored as more of a point guard. Okay, so if you're the Pacers and you would like to do that, do you abandon the off-ball stuff from last year? How do you blend those two roles? Is he just one of them? Is he just the other one? Is TJ McConnell playing? Is he not? Is Aaron Nesmith playing? Is he not? All of these things matter when thinking about Andrew Nembhard, and I think we'll find out early in the season. What do the Pacers think of Andrew Nembhard?
I'll put it this way. If I had known, and this is just my perspective, but if I had, before I knew that they were signing Bruce Brown and somebody was like, what would your projected starting lineup be? And this was before Obi Toppin too. I was like, well, based on what players they have now, Tyrese, Ben, Andrew, Jase, and Miles. Yeah. Like, I would still have started Andrew. So I'm curious to know that, like, if they have Bruce Brown for 2 years, how Bruce Brown does, would they consider playing Andrew with Ben and Tyrese? And it's like what I just said before, like, how do they feel about having two guards on the floor who are pick and roll guards at once? I mean, obviously that's what Cleveland's attempting to do with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and those aren't comparable players scoring wise for Andrew, but Andrew has more defensive potential than both of them. So I would like to know what they think of that model. Like, because if you don't think of that and you just want to have like a constant presence of a high processing, high level cerebral guard on the floor, then Andrew should definitely be playing backup point, and that's what his ceiling with this team's going to be. And if that's what his ceiling with this team's going to be, then it's even more important because, like I said, you need to maintain what he does best, because at that point, I think that he becomes a piece to get you another piece to start with Tyrese if you don't see that type of model being something you want to do. That being said, I don't think that, from what we've seen of Rick Carlisle in Dallas and Indiana, and I don't want to speak for him here, he can elaborate on this. I don't think he's opposed to having multiple point guards on the floor at once.
He has never been, right? There was quite a few minutes with Nembhard plus Haliburton or McConnell plus Haliburton, or Nembhard plus McConnell even on occasion. My tongue-in-cheek question first about Andrew Nembhard would be, will he have a better week this season than the West Coast road trip of in LA and in Golden State last year?
Tough to say. I mean, the defense, that was really a spectacular two-game stretch or three-game stretch. He was pretty good up at Portland as well. But, like, just what he did against Golden State in terms of staying that poised against that many different types of coverages. I mean, he starts the game, and eventually they defend Draymond on him with both sides of the pick and roll, whether Draymond's on him or Draymond's defending the screener. They had Kuminga full court press Andrew. They tried various types of zone. They had, there was a lot of different coverages going on, and Andrew performed against all of them. Like, I don't think that's something that he's routinely going to do every game, because certainly the step back was falling at a very high clip at the end of that one. But that is another good game to bring up because of what I've said in the past too, that, like, he and Isaiah Jackson had good chemistry in that game. He and Isaiah Jackson have had good chemistry in general. So, like, what you just said about how do they view Andrew, if next season is somewhat going to be about prioritizing him, then I think that you will play Isaiah. If it's about prioritizing, Jase and exploring other areas of his game, including his playmaking, you might not play Isaiah. So kind of what their early rotation will be will tell us a lot of things, I think, tangentially.
My more serious micro skill question about Andrew Nembhard would be, can he get all the way to the rim?
Yeah, that's
much more often. Because, like, this isn't the perfect stat to describe this, but 17.2% of his shots from 0 to 3 feet, 18.2 from 3 to 10 feet. Like, he took more from farther away, and he can get into the paint, but he's very, like, twitchy and wants to take that floater a lot or take that step back shot that we were talking about from that week. He was absolutely balling. And it's not quite Karis LeVert levels of bad, where LeVert just liked the floater, but Nembhard needs to get all the way to the rim, both because he's a decent finisher, especially at his size, 72.1% at that distance last year, but also because of what it does with sucking the defense in and creating more passing lanes, which he is very good at finding those passes. He's good at making tough passes amongst the trees. And so just taking one more dribble or like having the mentality of getting closer to the basket on his attacks would, I think, go a long way for his effectiveness and be good for the strengths he already has.
Yeah, I mean, Nembhard was at 3.17 shots per 100 possessions of his drives ending with a shot near the basket. So for Tyrese and TJ, that Tyrese at 7.7, TJ it's 8.5. Yep. So Nembhard is a very bump and swivel player. Like, he wants to get into the paint and play off of contact. And then one thing that he really likes to do is he'll snake his dribble around those screens. And then he'll use like a pound dribble, swivel his hips and go back to the back to get that shot instead of sometimes it's when he does have an open lane to the basket. And I think that the game that's kind of most telling about this is the one that they won against the Bucks, right? Because that was a huge halftime adjustment. Him coming out and consistently putting pressure on the rim in conjunction with the fact that Brook Lopez was not playing and Giannis was in foul trouble is what put them in position to get that win, because he was constantly trying to get toward the basket, whether that was in transition or the half court. And it was forcing Giannis to have to defend when he had 5 fouls. So I think he is capable of doing it. It's just not his natural rhythmic pattern always in the pick and roll with the way that he plays. So, and that's in part like his rim field goal percentage is good, but in part because he's very overly selective. And he's not like Ben's free throw rate on drives is like 20-something%. Andrews is like 8. So like I so much of the time I'm just like, can we just mash these two players into one guy? Because that guy would fit so well with Tyrese Haliburton. And I'm very confident that the Pacers would be signing him to a second contract. I'm almost like in the 90th percentile of that if they were one player.
What would it be? What would you do? Benadryl Matherbard or Anadict Nemarin? That was hard.
I don't know, but I sure hope it doesn't get to that point, Tony. I sure hope that we don't have debates over this on Twitter like Turner and Sabonis for years. Like I hope that doesn't occur.
I can't remember what I was typing. It might have just been Turbine. I had at one point where I typed a word in my iPhone and it autocorrected to Turbonis. And I was like, oh man, that is freaky.
It was said too many times, Tony. It was said too many times.
I typed it far too often. So this one's a little different. We've had some players that we've done where for the role part of this, it was just a bunch of question marks. This time it only is because of a question that we already talked about, which what does the Pacers think of you? So I'll propose it to you. How would you, Kalen, balance Andrew Nembhard's role between being the backup one and also getting off-ball reps? Where do you feel like the pendulum should fall? And obviously it's lineup dependent, but how would you divvy those minutes up?
Yeah, I mean, I think just based on what the starting lineup has to be, that your Andrew's going to be your backup one. He's going to come in, and it in part goes back again to Buddy, because I think both of us said on the Buddy pod that like Buddy needs to come in early to play minutes with Tyrese, and Ben probably needs to play some minutes with the second unit still to stretch his legs and get some of that offensive reps, because his usage swings so wildly when he plays with Tyrese. So that makes it a little bit trickier, I feel. Because if Buddy's coming in first, then Andrew's minutes are already getting dinged a bit. And I would still like to see Andrew playing some with Tyrese for the defensive benefits that you're gaining from it. And Tyrese, I think, is going to play almost the entirety of the first quarter. So I think, you're going to bring Andrew in for Tyrese, but hopefully Tyrese can come back in the second quarter and you can still get a peek at that, because I think it's important planning wise. And like I said, it may get to the point where like if Ben takes a step forward next year, and Andrew doesn't, then some of this is a moot point. But if the reverse would happen to happen, where Ben doesn't, or he struggles against changes on defense, and Andrew does take a step forward, then the way that you're viewing this and what your team building might be will be a little bit different. So I think it is important for them to still get looks at both. And I can see a scenario, I don't know how you feel, but I can see a scenario where Andrew still might be in some closing lineups. Like if they're 6 points down and it's 5 minutes left to play, it's very possible that you're leaning into Andrew Nembhard in those scenarios. So, I mean, there were minutes last year where Ben and Andrew were both in the closing lineup and they played with Buddy and Miles. So,
yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of like, you need an extra ball handler and a defender in a closing lineup. And like the default in your brain is Bruce Brown. But what if you need more than that? Or if how much defense do you need? How much ball handling do you need? It'll probably be matchup dependent, but there are some that Andrew makes the most sense of every available option. And especially in games where Tyrese isn't going, or someone proposed this today, like if they had to think about what his summer was all about, he played up through September. Like if they have to think about his minutes, there's a new player participation policy involved. Like maybe Drew's playing more in those situations. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for him.
Well, I don't know how much the player participation policy impacts a team that has one national TV game, but we'll see.
Yes, that is true. That is true. But the PPP policy, I already have
the redundancy department.
So best case scenario for Andrew Nembhard, I think that he adds to his abilities as a creator, specifically as that backup one, because then his role long-term is very obvious that he can do several things for the Pacers, both alongside Tyrese Haliburton as this defensive guy on the wing and as their backup one. So there's lots of opportunity minutes available for him, and he grows in that way. And I think a subplot would be that his fit with Tyrese Haliburton specifically looks solid this season, because then they know what he can be long-term. And the worst case would be that he is just mostly a utility defense guy, and some of those point guard reps don't look like something that's valuable. And what he was last year was actually the best role for him with this Pacers group.
Yeah, because, I mean, we did see some of both sides, even toward the back end of last season. His last little bit in that game against Charlotte, he didn't make some of the best decisions, and then they go up to Toronto, and he was terrific. Now, some of that was contributing by the fact that Toronto was, like, guarding him with Will Barton for some unknown reason. But, yeah, I mean, I think that would be the worst case to me would be that, they lean into, which it didn't sound from Chad that that's what they would do, but that they lean in heavily to make a push for the playoffs, and Bruce Brown squeezes out his role, and TJ continues to remain in the rotation, and you're not fully getting to see what you can see from Andrew. Yeah. Like, I guess I'm leaning towards it more from the team building perspective than for actually Andrew in this sense, but that's kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah, we'll learn a lot, I think, pretty early in the season, and maybe it'll come down to the camp competitions, for lack of a better term, on how they feel about him, what they feel like his best role should be, and how they plan on balancing the short and long term. And I don't know. I think Andrew has a lot of skills that make a lot of sense for this team and what they're good at, and him fitting in with their high pace style is not an issue already. So how does he grow out from there, and can he establish himself as a long-term guy? Because there are lots of ways he could do it. He is a smart player with lots of skills. I'm excited to watch him this year.
Maintain his value with the Pacers, and maintain his value if he's not going to be with the Pacers. That's the way that I view his season.
That's a good point. And then next year, I get to do the fun thing of explaining once again how third-year team options work with restricted free agency. So when I say it actually makes sense for them to decline his option so they can keep him longer, everybody understands. That is, of course, a part of his best case, being so good that they had to think about that.
Yeah. Well, Tony, look at us. We've talked about 15 players.
Is anybody going to tune in for the Oscar Tshiebwe, Isaiah Wong, Kendall Brown episode that we're not doing?
Another episode on the guys they invited to camp.
That's right. That is not happening. That's why we broke out the positions the way we did. The power forward episode would have had to include like Tshiebwe if we broke it out in a different way. We were running out of centers, so it was perfect. Kayla and I really enjoyed this. I think we tackled this in a way that tied everybody together, which is kind of what I wanted to do, because then it's one, way different than the season recaps we did 4 months ago, but two, kind of proves what's at stake for the Pacers this year in terms of, one, figuring out their long-term fits with their players, but two, they have a lot of competition and for a lot of guys who either want to play for personal reasons or want to play for financial reasons. It's a big story of their season.
And that's kind of an interesting point, because we just talked about the fact like they don't have two-way contracts to give out. They don't have any roster spots to give out. So sometimes when you bring in those types of guys, they can juice competition because they're hungry to get back in the NBA or to make it into the NBA. But the Pacers already have kind of enough spots up for grabs and people trying to establish themselves or potentially play for their next contract that they don't necessarily need that. So
it will certainly be fascinating. I'm sad it's over, but it was a fantastic series. Media Day just around the corner, and lots of other stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers. But we can't leave without Kaylin telling you where you can follow her and find her work covering the Pacers, the NBA, and more.
Right. So my handle's on the screen again. If you're listening to it in podcast form, it's at C2_Cooper. There's a link at my Twitter account to Patreon, patreon.com/basketball she wrote. I answered probably upwards of 35, 40 mailbag questions. That is all up. I tried to get that out ahead because there was all this, trade stuff around Dame that lingering around, and I didn't want things to get dated. And obviously this whole series, and then I have a podcast coming out tomorrow with Samson Fulcrum, Raptors Republic, in which the two of us, I gave an outside perspective on the Raptors, but I'll give a sneak peek and say that it is heavily Pacers. It is heavily a Pacers episode. So I think he's one of the brightest people covering basketball from an X's and O's standpoint. So if people want to hear me talk more about basketball, that will be an option for them.
I offered you an opportunity to plug yourself, and you did not talk about South Bend once.
I went to South Bend. And everybody was like, were you there for the Ohio State Notre Dame game? I'm like, no, I was there 2 days prior. I was filming little segments. I had never been there before. I've been to South Bend. I just never had been on actually Notre Dame's campus. Very pretty. Enjoyed myself. Also enjoyed the popsicle that I consumed during the video.
No one is making content like that. I need to go places to film more content. I don't know how to. Do you have a mic for those?
Yeah, I have a lapel mic. You can. I'm usually wearing a black shirt, so it doesn't really show up. But yeah,
I've looked for it before. Like when you did the one where you were in the car, I was like, how does she? There's no mic. How is this sounding like?
No, but I have a lapel mic. My sister has one too. Yeah. So if people don't know, like if they want to get behind the paywall of this content, like I go all out for these. I answer all the mailbag questions. I give a lot of thought and do a lot of research for them. I've been driving to Indiana area popsicle shops. I found like 4 this summer. I'm basically, I think we can all agree I'm the Guy Fieri of popsicles here, Tony. This is the Pacers popsicles and, whatever you want the third word to be of drive-ins, dive-ins, and drive. So, dives. So yeah, that's what I do. And then this time I went around and looked at some stuff at Notre Dame while I was up in South Bend. So I went to La Sonorita, tried out a new popsicle, answered all the questions. So we've done that like 3 or 4 times. They're longer videos, but hopefully people like them.
That is fantastic. We need another P word for this now.
Pacers, popsicles, and prospects. I don't know.
You could fly there and do like pilot or something. I don't know. Rick could fly you. Rick could fly you via a plane, and then it's perfect.
I told you, Tony, I'm afraid of small planes. It doesn't matter who the pilot is. I'm not getting in.
Oh man, Food Network, we're pitching you gold here. They've got to dive in. I'm not sure what day this will come out because of chaos this week, presumably Thursday. So tomorrow's show will be questions about veterans, and then it's media day time next week. I thought this would be a quiet media day. That has gone away. So we'll preview media day. We'll recap media day here, and then it's time for the season. After media day is over, we'll be 5 days away from a Pacers preseason game. So it's coming up quicker than you think. Lots of fun stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers. Give Caitlin a follow and subscribe to her work over at Basketball She Wrote. Thank you all a ton for listening today. We'll see you soon.